Hello there, welcome to Cool Talk and part 2 of the 1970s. The 1960s seemed to have lasted way too long that it blended into the next decade, and in the 70s the Vietnam War would end and Watergate would oust a corrupt president. So now the baby boomers decided, I'm gonna have some fun. I'm gonna take my paycheck, I'm gonna dance, I'm gonna blow my paycheck over the weekend, and I'm even gonna dance in roller skates. The baby boomers now blended into the me generation where anything goes and clothes became hot pants and wild colors, polyester suits, and platform shoes for men. A lot of people began using CB radios in their cars. Now, other people took more extreme behavior. They would run down the street or in a public place naked. This was called streaking. Then came the pet rock. Millions of them were sold for about $4 a piece. There was a toy called the clacker that was kind of fun. You gave it to your kids, but of course, a couple of broken arms ensued and the toy had to be recalled. Now, to see this self-indulgence of the decade, think about this. By 1980, the motto for Toys R Us was, I don't want to grow up, I am a Toys R Us kid. More boomers bought toys than children. After the United States withdrew from Vietnam, the North Vietnamese communists wasted no time in invading the South. They took over. The president of South Vietnam left the country and the nation fell. In Cambodia, civil war would break out and the Khmer Rouge and their leader Pol Pot would take over. The killing fields would line up with about 2 million people dead out of a population of only 7 million. In Taiwan, President Chiang Kai-shek died, and in Saudi Arabia, King Faisal was killed by his mentally disturbed nephew, gunned down at a reception. Gangster Sam Giancana was assassinated. In Boston, after they had resisted efforts of desegregation of schools with the busing systems, the courts ordered them to comply. Iraq reached a deal with Iran in trying to quell the uprising of the Kurds that numbered in the millions. In China, terracotta pottery of soldiers were found underground. They were 2,000 years old and there were hundreds of them. In Lebanon, Beirut is torn apart by civil war, and in southern Lebanon, Israeli warplanes would arrive and mount raids against the Palestinian guerrillas that are based there. Angola had become independent from Portugal, but this led to civil war, and Cubans would arrive armed with Soviet weapons to usher in a leftist regime. Karen Ann Quinlan, 21 years old, in a coma. Parents went to court to ask for her to be taken off life support, and a year later, California would approve the first right to die law. U.S. President Ford survived 2 assassination attempts, both carried out by women.
You talking to me? You talking to me?
Mao Zedong, 82 years old, leader of China since 1949, had died. In Lebanon, the factions that were rebelling there reached a peace agreement. However, Palestinians that were in Lebanon crossed the border into Syria, complicating an already complicated process. Chaos would continue, and when the American ambassador was killed, President Gerald Ford had all the Americans evacuated. July 4th, 1976, the United States was now 200 years old, and they celebrated the bicentennial. 105 Israeli hostages were being held in the Entebbe airport at Uganda by Palestinians who were supported by the president Idi Amin. The Israeli army snuck in and rescued all the hostages and killed the terrorists. 2 hostages would die in the process, along with 1 soldier. Spacecraft Viking 1 sent back pictures from Mars. Renee Richards wins her first tennis tournament as a woman. She had been born a male. In the Olympics in Montreal, Bruce Jenner exceeds all his fellow athletes and wins his picture on the cover of the Wheaties box. However, the person who really stood out at Montreal was Nadia Comaneci, only 14 years old. As a gymnast, she scored 3 perfect scores. Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter becomes President of the United States.
Relationship, I think, is like a shark. You know, it has to constantly move forward or it dies. And I think what we got on our hands is a dead shark.
Gary Gilmore becomes the first convicted killer executed in the United States in 10 years. The TV miniseries Roots draws 80 million viewers. In Nicaragua, Roman Catholic bishops accuse President Anastasio Somoza of torture, execution, and rape of civilians. And in India, President Indira Gandhi resigns under pressure. In Pakistan, Prime Minister Ali Bhutto is ousted from power. In the United States, serial killer David Berkowitz, son of Sam, is finally caught. President Jimmy Carter signs a deal handing the Panama Canal over to Panama. In Mogadishu, Germans rescue 86 hostages that were being held inside of a 737 jet. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat shocks the world when he reaches out to Israel wanting to make peace.
And I thank God I'm alive. You're just too good to be true.
Did you say over? Nothing is over until we decide it is. Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Hell no!
German? Forget it, he's rolling.
It ain't over now.
In Nicaragua, a newspaper editor, Pedro Chamorro Cardenal, who was critical of the Nicaraguan government, was killed. In boxing, Leon Spinks takes the title away from Muhammad Ali, but Ali would regain it back 4 months later. In Afghanistan, Mohammed Daoud was shot to death by rebels. In the meantime, in Zaire, communist rebels threatened President Mobutu. Princess Caroline of Monaco marries businessman Philippe Junot, while the first test tube baby, Louise Brown, was born in London. Pope Paul VI dies, and just 1 month later, the new Pope John Paul I dies, and finally, John Paul II would become the new Pope. He was Polish. Jimmy Carter would invite the leaders of Egypt and Israel to Camp David to sign a peace agreement, the Camp David Accords. Punk rocker Sid Vicious stabs his girlfriend to death. 1 month later, he was dead of a drug overdose. Cult leader Jim Jones over in Jonestown, Guyana. He is under investigation by Washington, so he orders his followers, all 900, to commit suicide.
Move in with her and live there from now on. And I'm really lucky because I get to have dinner with you once a week. And 2 times a month, we spend the weekends together.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
In Iran, as millions protest, demonstrate, and march, the Shah and his family feel the pressure and they flee. Exiled religious leader Ayatollah Khomeini returns, greeted by millions, and he establishes a fundamentalist government. But when the Shah is accepted in the United States for medical treatment, Iranians are angry. They seize the United States Embassy in Iran and take over 50 American hostages. President Jimmy Carter freezes their bank assets, but the hostages are still held. Former Vice President and millionaire Nelson Rockefeller dies. Pope John Paul II begins touring Latin America. The new Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping invades Vietnam, and he forces Cambodia and Laos to sign some accords. In the nuclear power plant in the United States, 3 Mile Island, there was a radiation leak. President Carter toured the nuclear plant. Everything was under control, but the plant was shut down. In Uganda, Idi Amin, the president, was forced out of office. He fled to Egypt after having killed about 500,000 of his own people. In Pakistan, the former premier, Bhutto, was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder on a political rival. He was hanged in front of his wife. Margaret Thatcher becomes the first woman Prime Minister of England. In Nicaragua, President Somoza is ousted from power, but the country is in ruins. Thousands are dead, 500,000 are displaced, and Marxist rebels take over. legendary actor John Wayne passes away. The United States and the Soviet Union signed a pact limiting the number of long-range missiles that each could have. In Cambodia, Pol Pot, dictator, is ousted from power. Actress Jean Seberg had made quite an impression in France. However, because of her friendship with the Black Panthers, she was under investigation by the FBI. Persecuted, humiliated, she finally had a breakdown. She left the house wearing nothing but a blanket, got in a car, drove away, and was found dead, decomposing days later. When rebels in Afghanistan fight against a Marxist government, the Soviet Union invades, sending in troops and tanks. Mother Teresa wins a Nobel Peace Prize. Well, the United States was going through a hard time. The hostages were still being held in Iran. There was an embargo and oil prices had shot up, causing long gas lines. There was stagflation, which is a combination of inflation and unemployment. President Carter wasn't catching a break, so he decided to address the nation. But what did he do? He spoke to the country, and it sounded like he was blaming the American people for lack of nerve. I don't think that was his intention, but that's how it came across. So he was going to have some hard times ahead. But we're going to talk about that in the next video, the 1980s. In the meantime, tell me what you think. Comment below, or better yet, subscribe. This is Cool Talk.